Last week I turned 83, a number that feels less like an age and more like a sentencing, and the occasion passed with the complete absence of celebration that marks the milestones of the truly forgotten. There was no party, no gathering of friends because they are mostly gone, just a Tuesday that felt exactly like the Monday preceding it. The singular event of the day was the scheduled telephone call from my daughter, who lives a lifetime away overseas. A conversation that lasted precisely 10 minutes and consisted entirely of polite, glassy surface tension. We discussed the unseasonable warmth where she is, the unremarkable damp cold where I am, and the vague, highly important pressures of a job I do not understand, skittering over the reality of our lives like flat stones on ice, because plunging any deeper would require an intimacy we seem to have misplaced decades ago. When the line went dead, leaving that specific hollow electronic buzz in my ear before the profound silence of the house rushed back in to fill the vacuum, I didn't feel sadness so much as a dull sense of inevitability. I lowered my stiffening body into my chair, the worn leather wingback by the north-facing window, where a persistent, chilly draft always manages to find the exposed skin of my ankles. A sensation that used to irritate me with its inefficiency, but now just feels like the only reliable company I have left, and I sat there clutching a ceramic cup of tea that had gone disappointingly lukewarm while I listened to my daughter talk about humidity. The afternoon light was slant and thin, cutting across the room and illuminating the dust motes dancing lazily in the still air. Tiny, suspended fragments of a house that is slowly decaying around me, gold in the light but gray in the shadows. And it was in that suspended, achingly quiet moment, watching dead skin and fabric fibers float above cold tea, that the realization finally cut through the accumulated noise of 83 years and settled heavily onto my chest. It wasn't a dramatic arrival. There was no sudden panic, no scream rising in my throat, no cinematic clutching of the heart. It was just a heavy, undeniable, and incredibly cold fact that landed with the permanence of a tombstone. I have lived the wrong life. For decades I had operated under a powerful, sustaining delusion, telling myself over and over that the endless hours at the office, the missed dinners, the constant mental calculus of ambition and security were merely temporary sacrifices, necessary down payments on a future freedom, a grind that was just a means to a glorious, relaxed end. But sitting here now, with the vast majority of my timeline firmly behind me and the horizon impossibly close, I can see with devastating, unforgiving clarity that the end I was maniacally working toward was nothing more than a shimmering mirage that retreated further with every desperate step I took toward it. I looked around the darkening living room, a museum of a life lived entirely on paper, surrounded by the physical manifestations of things I had convinced myself mattered supreme. The deed to a mortgage entirely paid off, representing safety, but feeling now like a cage built of equity. The pristine credit score that sits on a server somewhere, a number no one calls to congratulate me on. A dusty cardboard box tucked away in the hall closet, filled with heavy plaques and glass awards from a career that has not only forgotten my name, but has likely replaced my entire function with a piece of software. These cold trophies of responsible adulthood surrounded me, mocking me with their permanence, yet I have never in my entire existence felt more utterly hollow, like a dried husk of corn left standing in the field long after the harvest is over. It is a profoundly disorienting, sickening thing to reach the absolute finish line, out of breath and out of time, only to look up and realize with dawning horror that you were running on the wrong track entirely, in a race you didn't actually want to win. You do not get to go back to the starting pistol. There is no cosmic do-over available for purchase. There is only the sitting with the compounded results of 10,000 small choices, And the result of my life is this overwhelming, echoing silence, a silence so thick and loud it actually hurts my ears, pressing in on me with the suffocating truth of everything I traded away to secure it. I can close my eyes and see the young man I used to be, with a clarity that is almost painful. A 25-year-old ghost haunting the corridors of my memory, ambitious and hungry, and deeply, secretly terrified of being poor. I can see the cheap suit I wore, the way I polished my shoes until they reflected the fluorescent lights of the office, and the way I walked with a hurried purpose that I thought signaled importance, but actually just signaled fear. I made a solemn deal with myself in those early days, a contract signed in invisible ink that would dictate the course of the next half-century. I decided that I would suffer now, that I would grind my bones to dust and harden my heart against the softness of the world, also that I could live later. It seemed like such a sensible, logical trade at the time, a simple equation of delayed gratification where I invested my youth to purchase a golden, leisurely old age. Everyone around me was making the exact same wager. We were a brotherhood of the exhausted, nodding at each other over cups of bitter office coffee, wearing our sleep deprivation and our ulcers like badges of honor, convinced that our misery was proof of our virtue. I deliberately chose the job that paid the most, ignoring the one that sparked a fire in my belly, because I had convinced myself that passion was a luxury for the wealthy and that duty was the language of the responsible man. I married Martha, a woman whose laugh could light up the darkest corners of my anxious mind, but I proceeded to give the best hours of my day and the best energy of my spirit to clients whose faces I can no longer remember, leaving her with only the scraps of my fatigue. The memory that haunts me most vividly is a Tuesday in 1974, a day that should have been forgettable, but has instead become a monument to my regret. Martha stood in the kitchen, the morning sun catching the dust in the air, and asked with a rare, hopeful timidity if we could just get in the car and drive to the coast, just for the day, just to see the water. I didn't even look up from my briefcase. I told her I couldn't, that I had a deadline, that the world would crumble if I wasn't at my desk by 9, and I delivered the line that became the mantra of my existence. "Next month," I promised her. "We'll go next month when things calm down." That was the lie I told her, and more importantly, the lie I told myself for 40 years, a seductive promise that there was a calm horizon waiting just after the next project, the next promotion, the next fiscal quarter. I didn't realize then, in my arrogance and my blindness, that life never calms down. It only speeds up, gathering momentum like a stone rolling down a hill until the years blur into a gray smear of motion. I missed school plays because of client dinners. I missed anniversaries because of business trips that resulted in nothing but paperwork. And I remember with an agonizing sharpness the silhouette of my son standing in the doorway of my study, holding a baseball glove and smelling of grass and hope, waiting for me to acknowledge him. I waved him away with a flick of my wrist, a gesture that cost me nothing then, but costs me everything now, telling him, not now, telling him that what I was doing was for him, that I was building his future. I thought I was the ultimate provider, the responsible patriarch, and in a material sense I was. I provided the food that filled the pantry, the clothes that filled the closets, and the mortgage payments that secured the roof, but I starved them of the only thing that actually mattered. I starved them of me. I starved myself of them, viewing every moment of joy or connection as a distraction from the real work, treating my entire life as a waiting room, a temporary holding pattern where I marked time and held my breath, waiting for the mythical day when the real living would finally begin. I didn't know, I simply didn't know, that the waiting room was the life, that the mundane Tuesdays and the interruptions and the requests to drive to the coast were not obstacles to my existence, but the very substance of it. And by the time I looked up from my desk to finally claim my reward, the deadline had passed, the boy had grown up, and the woman who wanted to see the ocean was gone. The bill for my emotional negligence finally came due 7 years ago, arriving not in an envelope, but in the subtle, terrifying rasp of a cough that Martha couldn't quite shake, a sound that started as background noise to our breakfast and slowly grew to consume our entire world. It wasn't dramatic at first, no collapsing in the garden or sirens wailing in the night, just a persistent, nagging irritation that we tried to ignore until the denial wore thin and we were forced into the cold, clinical ecosystem of the sick, the endless appointments that ate up the calendar I used to guard so jealously, the blood draws, the scans, the waiting rooms with their muted televisions, and the terrifying smell of antiseptic that clings to your clothes long after you leave. We sat in those white rooms under the relentless hum of fluorescent lights, the same lights I had spent my life working under, and I held her hand, realizing with a jolt of panic that I didn't know the texture of her skin anymore. We had spent 40 years building a cathedral of future plans, a detailed itinerary of the life we would lead once I finally stepped off the treadmill. We were going to rent a villa in Tuscany and drink wine in the afternoon. We were going to take watercolor classes and paint terrible landscapes. We were going to take those long, aimless walks where we didn't have to look at a watch. But when the doctor sat down, avoiding our eyes, and told us in a soft, practiced voice that the cancer was aggressive and that she had perhaps 6 months left, the cathedral collapsed into dust. I remember looking down at Martha's hands resting on the paper sheet of the exam table, and for the first time I really saw them, saw the liver spots, the thinning skin, the way her wedding ring spun loosely on her finger, and I realized with a nausea that nearly knocked me over that I had missed her growing old. I had been sleeping in the same bed, eating at the same table, but I had been looking through her, focused on the horizon, and while I was looking away, she had aged, and now she was leaving. I retired the very next day, walking away from the desk and the title without a backward glance, driven by a frantic, desperate need to balance the books before the account was closed. I tried to cram 40 years of missed affection, missed conversations, and missed tenderness into a timeline that was shrinking by the hour. I became her nurse, her reader, her constant shadow, trying to be the husband I should have been in 1974, trying to learn the rhythm of her breathing and the map of her fears. But the cruel truth is that you cannot make up for lost time. You cannot take a relationship that has been starved of oxygen for decades and expect it to bloom overnight, and you cannot unclench a fist that has been closed around ambition for a lifetime in a single day. My touch felt clumsy, my words felt inadequate, and every moment of intimacy was tainted by the knowledge that I was only doing this because the clock was running out. She died on a rainy Tuesday, the rain drumming against the roof in a steady, indifferent rhythm, and when the silence fell, the house that I had worked so hard to pay for, the symbol of my success, instantly transformed into a vast, expensive tomb. I walked into the kitchen the next morning, the habit of routine pulling me forward, and saw her reading glasses sitting on the granite counter where she had left them, lenses dusty, waiting for eyes that would never open again. That was the moment the regret hit me, not as a wave of sadness, but as a devastating tsunami of clarity that drowned me where I stood. I realized I had traded thousands of dinners, thousands of quiet Sunday mornings, thousands of chances to just hold her hand, all for a career that replaced me within 2 weeks of my departure, a company that didn't pause for a second when I left. I sat in the chair across from hers at the breakfast table, staring at the empty space where she used to drink her coffee, and I understood with a final crushing weight that all the later I had greedily saved up, all the time I thought I was banking for our golden years, was gone. It hadn't been saved at all. It had simply evaporated, wasted in the pursuit of things that could not love me back, leaving me with a paid-off house, a silent kitchen, and a chair that would never be filled again. So here I am, anchored in this chair at the age of 83, a number that sounds impossibly large when you say it out loud, like a distance too far to walk. Yet here I sit at the end of the road. I am not speaking to you now to solicit your pity, for pity is a useless, flimsy currency that does nothing to warm the cold draft in this room or fill the silence that rings in my ears. I don't need your sympathy. I need your attention. I'm telling you this story, stripping away the varnish of my life to show you the rotting wood beneath, because when I look out at the world, I see you. I see you checking your watch during a conversation that matters, calculating how much time you can afford to spend on a human being before you have to rush back to a task that does not. I see you prioritizing the urgent ping of an email over the quiet, patient presence of the people who love you. I see you telling yourself the same seductive lies I told myself, whispering that you will do the thing you love, write the book, take the trip, or just sit on the floor and play with your children once you have enough money, once the career is secure, once the kids are older, once the timing is absolutely perfect. I want to reach through this screen, grab you by the shoulders with my trembling hands, and shake you until you understand that the timing will never be perfect, that the stars will never align in a way that gives you permission to start living, because life is not a schedule to be managed, but a chaotic, fleeting mess to be experienced. I have a substantial amount of money in the bank, figures on a statement that used to give me a thrill of security. But sitting here now, I realize that money is just paper and pixels, utterly impotent against the weight of regret. I would trade every single cent of it. I would bankrupt myself this very second and live in a shack, just for one more rainy Tuesday with Martha, just to hear her hum in the kitchen one more time, just to feel the warmth of her hand in mine. I would trade my entire pension, every award in that cardboard box, and the respect of every peer I ever tried to impress, just to go back to that doorway in 1985 and catch the baseball my son was tossing, to look him in the eye and say, yes, instead of not now. But I can't. The transaction is closed. My son is 50 years old now, a grown man with gray in his beard and a furrow in his brow that looks painfully like my own. He is a good man, responsible and diligent, but he is distant, separated from me by a chasm of polite estrangement that I dug myself, shovel by shovel, year after year. We speak, but we are like courteous strangers meeting in a waiting room. There is no warmth, no shared language of the heart, because he learned his lessons from me too well. He learned that work comes first, that vulnerability is a weakness, and that feelings are something to be filed away for a later date that never comes. That is my true legacy, not the wealth I accumulated or the business I built, but the emotional distance I instilled in my own child, the inheritance of coldness that he now carries into his own life. If you are listening to this, if my voice is reaching you in your car or your kitchen or your office, you likely have the one thing I no longer possess. You have time. You do not have an infinite amount, though it feels that way when you are young, but you have some. Do not hoard it like a miser. Do not stuff it into a mattress for a future retirement that isn't guaranteed, and do not invest it all in a version of yourself that only exists on a spreadsheet. I'm going to finish this cup of tea now, even though it has gone cold, and then I am going to stand up, however slowly, and walk out into the garden. I'm going to look at the flowers, really look at them, noticing the way the petals curl and the way the color bleeds from the center to the edge, and I'm going to appreciate them for the first time in my life, not as scenery, but as miracles. It is a small life now, a life of small rooms and small movements, but it is the only life I have left, and I intend to inhabit it fully for whatever days remain. Please, I beg of you, do not wait until you are 83, sitting in a drafty chair with a heart full of ghosts, to realize that the life you were saving up for is happening right now, in this very breath, while you are looking the other way.